Hello everyone, my name is Benjamin Yoder with One Controller Port, here today to talk to you about Tomodachi Collection. This is a Nintendo DS title released by Nintendo that's kind of a relationship simulator, and if this sounds familiar, you might be familiar with the later releases in this franchise, Tomodachi Life on the Nintendo 3DS, which if you played that, it's going to sound very similar to what we're talking about today. And then there's also the Miitomo app that unfortunately is no longer available, where you can kind of have your friends' Miis interact with your and things like that. But this original game was actually never released within the US, and importing it was a bit rough since it has a pretty heavy reliance on the Japanese language and needs you really to understand that. So thankfully, somebody went and translated this game. Jules with 2 J's released a translation. I'm running the 0.8 version of that translation, and while it's not the full experience, and there's definitely some things that haven't been finished in the translation, at least the version that I'm running, it really does enough to let you, kind of experience this, for the most part, how it was originally intended. It basically gets you most of the way there. Though, as we talk, you might find that there's not too much of a reason to come back to this one, especially if you played Tomodachi Life. If you've never played a Tomodachi game, basically, the whole concept is that you have this apartment complex on this island, and you create Miis or import Miis from the Wii to populate this apartment. And so the intention is that, you create your original Mii that's based off you, and then you have either friends or celebrities or some kind of fictional character that you kind of put in that world. And if you're putting someone that's familiar into the game, it kind of creates some little fun situations, depending on how they interact with each other. In my case, I had Umihara Kawase and Noctis from Final Fantasy 15 become lovers, and they never separated the entire game, so that may not seem like a match made in heaven, but they both do love fishing, so there you go. So basically, when you're creating these Miis, you set parameters on them, and that kind of determines their personality, and it can be a little hard, based off what they offer you, to kind of predict how a Mii will come out and how they'll act. But honestly, a lot of the personality of these characters don't really shine through in any major identifiable way, outside of kind of how they talk and maybe how they animate a little bit. It usually comes down to hey, if you make someone weird, they're gonna fart a bunch probably, or if you make somebody fairly serious, they probably aren't going to fart a bunch. I'm guessing it also probably has an impact on some of the decisions you make and how they react to that as well, but it's not something that is super obvious. So once you have your Miis in your apartment, it becomes very much like a virtual pet simulator. Your Mii will get hungry, they'll ask for clothes or different style of apartments that they'll want you to put them in, and they may ask you to play a game with them as well, or ask for advice and a variety of little tasks here and there. And really the main focus of this game is kind of watching their reactions to these events, or kind of watching their reaction to different situations they're kind of put in. And that's kind of the main entertainment factor here. And it's a pretty relaxing game, and I will say, when it came to my original approach to this game, I was looking more of it at an Animal Crossing kind of way, where you kind of log in, do your chores for the day, then just kind of log out, right? But I would say this game functions much better as more of a virtual pet, like I mentioned earlier, that kind of lives with you, like a Tamagotchi. Leave the game on in your DS, have it in your pocket, and then, once in a while, pop it open, see what's going on, poke around, see what people need, and give them that stuff, and then just kind of close it back up again. So it's something I think is better paced throughout your day, rather than playing it in an hour chunk every day or something like that. But even within this context, it's a pretty limited experience. There's not a lot of variety in what you do, and you'll start seeing things repeat pretty often. That and the reactions that characters have don't really have a lot of variety to them. They'll either like something or dislike it, maybe to a bit more of an extreme degree, where you get a little funny animation that plays out. But it's nothing very significant, and a lot of what they're asking for you, when they're asking you for food, it's just hey, I'm hungry. There's no real necessary needs there. Outfits, they might ask you for a particular type of outfit, but it's a little hard to understand what they're looking for. Oh, I want something that's sporty, but then you give them sportswear, and I don't like this. And it's well, do you not like it because it's not sporty, or is there something about the color scheme you don't like? There's not a lot of information that they give back to you regarding that. So it becomes very trial and error-y as you just kind of give them stuff, and there's not a lot of reason to kind of figure out what you're going to give them, basically. at least as far as I can tell, there seems to be no significant pattern, and there's no real reason to learn it because there's very minor consequences for giving them something they don't like. Kind of the real driving factor here is when you give them stuff, they'll kind of give you money back or things that will eventually feed into money, and then you take that money and buy more food and more clothes and more interiors, which you then feed back to your Mii. Your Miis do level up as you give them stuff, so as long as they're liking what you give them, they'll go ahead and gain like experience points, and once they level up, you can choose between some additional idle animations. So when they're walking around their apartment, what are they doing? They're playing Nintendo DS, they're writing in a notebook, things like that. And you can also get some like freebie apartment interiors, some songs that they can sing, and they can also like learn a catchphrase. So whenever you speak to them, they'll say like, "Oh, something something." I couldn't think of anything great, sorry. but yeah, there's not a lot of consequence for doing something poorly outside of maybe losing a little bit of experience, or in some cases they might end up depressed, and you have to kind of get them back out of that depression. And then once you get them out of that depression, you're also kind of rewarded for that. So there could be some benefit to like purposely trying to get your Mii depressed, but it seems random enough that there's not really a way to do that. There's also some events that can happen outside the apartment. So basically, they'll like go to the fountain and they'll play some music, and those are like on a scheduled timer, so you can check the schedule for the day and see what they're doing and when. And all of that is just populated automatically. You don't get to choose like which Miis go and participate in those. And then you have some events that players kind of activate. So there's like tents around the area where you can like ask your Miis a question and they'll kind of respond in some way, or they'll also have one where you can like get like a job test done to a character so you can see what kind of career they're going to end up in with some like silly graphics and things like that. But there's no real depth or variety to these. So once you've kind of looked at them once, for the most part you've largely kind of gotten the point of them, and their entertainment factor definitely drops quite a bit fairly quickly. I think maybe the one that kind of held up was the music ones. If there's like a street performance, those are always fun if you found new songs. And sometimes you go to the fountain and a character will be there on their own, like practicing the song and only playing their one instrument part of that song. So it's kind of an interesting way to hear a song in a different way because you're just hearing like one track of it. So there's fun and cute things like that, but rarely does like the Mii's personality make any kind of difference in these events, which I think is the big thing. They just get kind of shoved in a cookie cutter role, and then they just kind of play their role there, and it really could have been any other Mii, and the process of how that played out would largely be the same outside of they might say like, "Oh, what's your favorite food?" and be like, "I love tofu," or something like that, right? And then everybody has their own favorite food kind of thing. And it kind of makes the game a grind at some point, when, especially if you're just trying to like beat the game, which essentially is once you get two characters to marry each other, which you don't really have a lot of control over, to be honest. So you just kind of sit there and keep feeding characters stuff, give them outfits, and just kind of watch them until they start developing these relationships, and that kind of progresses you. But it definitely becomes very repetitive. But again, if you treat it like a hands-off experience, I think you'll have some fun with it. Now, the big thing here is that Tomodachi Life on the Nintendo 3DS, as far as I can tell, is basically just an improvement on this game. There's not really a lot of reason to come back to this one. I have a particular soft spot for the soundtrack of this game and like kind of the DS instrumentation that they use here, but otherwise, it's pretty limited. And even Tomodachi Life on the Nintendo 3DS is fairly limited. There's it kind of even though it's expanded a lot of things and there's more places you can kind of go and watch where the Mii's are participating, go to cafes and things like that. It's just not like a big bulky experience. It's just something you look at sometimes and you kind of laugh at, and then you kind of close your 3DS, and then it's kind of over. But the one big benefit with Tomodachi Life is it's in English, so hearing the characters can be a bit more charming if you don't know Japanese. I will say some level of Japanese is definitely helpful with this game. There's some mini games that kind of rely on it, but again, there's no real penalty for losing those mini games, so it's not a big deal. And if you're trying to make characters pronounce things certain ways, knowing how phonetically Japanese works can be helpful in creating them, saying whatever words you want. But Tomodachi Collection is definitely an interesting game within the history of Nintendo. If you haven't looked at it yet, I really recommend looking at Miyamoto's 2007 GDC conference, where he kind of talks about the origins of the Mii. And how they came to be. And that conference is actually a couple years before Tomodachi Collection came out. But that story is very much a story of how how, you know, not only how the Mii's came together, but also like where Tomodachi Collection came from, because Nintendo has been trying to make a game like this for a very long time, and so it's a really fascinating history. So if you ever are curious about the Tomodachi franchise, I'll actually link that Miyamoto GDC conference if I can find it on YouTube at the end of this video. Take a look at that if you're interested in the history. Otherwise, probably just play Tomodachi Life. That's it for this week. Thanks for coming. OneControllerPort.com is the website. I don't know if I have any other like related videos that are related to Tomodachi specifically or Mii's, but maybe I'll link like a We Play video or something. But yeah, otherwise, if you like this video, like, subscribe, and I guess come back sometime and maybe I'll have something relevant to you. Anyways, I hope you have a great week. Bye.